Hey everybody, welcome back to the cave. Adam Savage here with two of my heroes. Cowbutt Crunchy is how you might have heard of them out in the world. I know them as Regan and Kelley. Hi guys.
Hi.
It is so good to see you in here. And oh my God, you know, you went off into a little room to change into these things and then you came out absolutely transformed from the last video we shot. Tell me about these amazing costumes.
So these are actually pretty old. They're actually some of the very first costumes that we made that we decided, let's be really ambitious.
And let's actually take this serious.
Yes. This is kind of like a blast into our past.
The door into
the stuff we do now.
But this is the... Sorry, I'm a little annoyed at you because it is insane.
It is not our first costume. It is
no,
not.
I get that it's not your first costume, but it's the first time you got ambitious, and this is what you did.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like so much of cosplay is being willing to reach out and try and do something that you've not done before and take the risk. And a lot of times it really pays off. And that's so much of why we know a lot of different techniques that that we like to smash all into our cosplays nowadays because we want to keep trying new things.
I so appreciate that as someone who's constantly trying new things. I have a really high-level question about these two costumes because they're both such really specific silhouettes that work with your bodies and your form and with each other, and that's a hard thing to do by yourself. So I'm curious about how you get the silhouette right and fill the costume into it. Maybe that's too big a question.
Undergarments, I feel.
So yeah, I mean, these are costumes from a Japanese artist. Right. She does these beautiful, beautiful art books. And so these are she did a whole book of witches. Okay. So these are from the witch book. But we both, we tend to lean towards specific silhouettes because, when you do this so long, you're like, I know I look good in that. I know I do not look good in that.
It's also just what I enjoy.
Also what you enjoy. Sure. Regan enjoys having the bigger the hoop, the higher the hair, the closer to God kind of aesthetic.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, in the process, when it was time to do the feathers, how many iterations to know that you had the balance between the wig and the feathers and the shoulders and the corset and the dress?
I feel like it's very much a try it on as you go sort of thing, because it is very easy to go overboard and, being able to edit it down and take it away. She doesn't have this problem. She always is more simplistic about her approach to that kind of thing.
I like to keep proportion in mind from the beginning. So I think with this, what we had done was we built the corset because the corset took forever because there's just so many layers.
It's built like a real corset with the boning.
Oh yeah. It's got steel.
To get that shape that you were talking about, you really do need something more structurally sound.
Yeah, there's probably 3 yards of steel in this.
That's not even a lot.
It's not even a lot. So we built a corset and she built the wig, and then you sort of had the start point and the end point, and then you can play with the proportions.
Yeah, and being able to put something on a form and just see what visually looks good is just, as you go along.
So you have forms that match your bodies.
It's
always the
Close
problem.
enough. Close enough. That's why you put it on yourself at some point.
Right.
Yeah, I think we made this jacket in muslin 3 or 4 times. The sleeve we had to do a bunch.
This one was actually the hardest to get the shape of this correct.
Fascinating.
Because we were playing with. The collar was kind of okay, well, this is how far out the collar should be, but then figuring out the puffs and then the proportion of the puffs to each other in a way that, because this is actually not what the proportions of this are different than they are
much smaller,
in the art.
Actually.
Really?
It's easy to go overboard because you have to remember that the reference is not a real person.
It's not a person.
It's like a noodle person.
Right.
So they have much longer arms and legs than we do. So there's more room.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of emphasis on accuracy.
Yeah.
However, I think that what accuracy should be is your translation from the 2D thing to what it would work in real life. So
it's so funny that you say that. I get the question all the time here, where does my fidelity line stop? And I say it's different for every project because I'm not looking for perfect fidelity to a picture or a thing. I'm looking for a fidelity to an experience.
Yes.
And that's what you're referring to.
Yes.
If it doesn't work on a person, then it's not a costume.
No, it's, you've made it exactly like it is on paper, but if it doesn't look correct for real life, I don't think you've translated that quite right. And so I feel like, having the willingness to kind of bend the rules a little
Right,
bit is
yeah.
kind of an important part.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this. We're putting out another book on like ball gowns and fancy wear, and there's a whole part in there where we're talking about proportion and like not being afraid to change the source material, because you have to think about the overall look on a human and like being comfortable and translating the feel of something that is like two-dimensional onto a human being. For me, feel is more important than fidelity.
Yes.
Like this is way shorter, but I feel like it feels more like the art than if I had made
it's
it longer.
the feeling you got from the art.
Yeah.
So when at one point I found out that one of Chewbacca's bandoliers was smaller in many forms than most people thought, and so I made one in that form, and instantly my Chewbacca costume looked taller. And it was a fascinating lesson in small changes can yield these huge shifts. And how I'm working on a Doctor Strange right now, and the hardest part for me is I'm never going to be Benedict Cumberbatch thin here, but that costume is such a long costume. I realize I have to make the proportion of the belt to me really matters.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm just discovering that and sort of playing around with it. Okay, so I'm also curious, like I see you put wire in this.
Yeah.
At what point in the process do you know that this one bends down and this one bends up, or is it each time you put it on?
This is a bit more like kind of how, how it feels that day.
Okay.
But I knew that it needed to bend in a
Pop a little.
specific shape, and then it's also attached to the corset. So like figuring out how it was going to curve
it's a
in sort of
wing on it. Oh my goodness.
two-dimensional. It was interesting. It was interesting, and then running this through the sewing machine with there's like 12 gauge wire in here.
Yeah.
It was like
Again,
break the needle.
Again, old costume, learning experience.
Right.
Learning experience.
Like doing
That's
this,
not how I would do that now.
doing it back then was just like, oh my God, what am I doing?
Well, so I'm curious about, for each of you, what was the most difficult problem to solve in these, and how would you solve that problem differently today?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think these were really difficult. I remember having a lot of problems with these.
I remember you had a lot of struggle with that.
And then getting the feathers attached. And I think what I would do now is probably have them boned around the edges and maybe put them on a belt so that they're not attached to this.
Right. Attachment solves some problems but brings in others.
Exactly.
What is the problem that having this attached causes?
It just, it gives you less flexibility for sort of keeping the shape of everything else.
Copy
this
that.
should really also flare out more, but
Right.
it won't
Right.
because of the weight. And I think a combination of changing where the support is and having it not be captured to this line would help. It's an engineering.
It sounds like you guys are very forgiving with your past selves and the problems you would solve better today.
Here's the thing, when you don't know what you're doing, that doesn't mean that you're not a good or one day will be a great cosplayer. Everybody starts somewhere.
Yeah.
And even us, if you look at things that we've made like a year ago, we would probably do it differently, frankly. Like you're always learning. Like we're not professionals because we dabble in everything. And so like that's kind of the fun part of it, always learning new stuff. If I was perfect at it, I don't think it'd be fun anymore.
It wouldn't be fun.
I loved you talking about building the jacket 3 or 4 times in muslin, learning when to stop throwing good money after bad and start again from scratch. That's got to be one of the hardest parts.
Muslin is everyone's very cheap. Muslin.
That's learning how to start the process in a way that's more forgiving is much easier. I mean, we still struggle.
Impatient. I always want to build the thing and start the thing, and then it's like it's not going well, and I realize, oh my God, I'm going to spend my whole life trying to fix my mistakes.
You do that.
I feel like I do that with it's silicone casting the most. That's where all the money just goes, woo, because I've made the mistake over and over and over, and you can't do a muslin with that. So
you have to,
That's the way you can do a muslin with sewing. So I feel like we've learned that lesson there. Haven't really gotten to apply that to the armor making, mold making yet, but if you have a hint for how to not do that.
Well, when you're making a silicone mold, and that's when you learn that the thing you made isn't gonna fly. It's a tough one. And that's institutional knowledge too. You get better at knowing materials and how they're gonna move and what you're gonna want out of them. I'm sure your approach to Warbler today is radically different than it was when you were first using it.
It is, which is, it's not perfect for everything. and honestly, and that's kind of a huge takeaway from this costume. You know, I'm still actually really happy with the way that a lot of it looks, but I'd probably use different materials just because, like, oh, maybe it would be a little lighter. Maybe it would be a little easier to work with, that kind of thing. Maybe I can make it smoother, easier. You know, that I think is the big change, is knowing when to use what, or, you know, deciding, oh, here's how this will look when I'm finished with it. I should use that instead, which is, I think, what works with a lot of your, you know, handwork that you brought today as well.
So this is what it started with.
Right.
And then you stuff it, and then you add more height on it, and then you embroider over it, and then you add the metal threads. And so, you know, you're like here, and you're like, oh, this looks bad. I have to continue. I have to trust.
Yes.
And then it looks really good.
Yeah.
But the other thing about this is that, you know, we're looking at three different techniques, right? That all put into one single piece. So, you know, you are not limited in terms of, you know, what you can do. It doesn't have to be a traditional technique.
Right,
you can
right.
combine and do whatever you want to make the piece that you want it to look like.
When I built my first whip, I built it from a book, and then I found a whip maker and I called him, and I had made some efficiencies from the book that were different, that veered off of what the book told me.
Yeah.
And it was so delightful to have him say, yeah, whip makers do that thing you did, right? Like, you on your own figured it out. And doing that, like cobbling together multiple techniques to get the result, I never care about that it wasn't some, you know.
You just have a vision.
You have to just play around with it.
Like when you have a vision for what you want it to look like, you know, being able to
pick, I'm going to do this technique and this technique and this technique, and they will come together eventually.
This makes me so tired just looking at it.
I'm going to put this on, I have to make a whole second one. They're going to go on Marceline.
Beautiful, look at that. There used to be this nightclub in New York called the Limelight, and I had some art shows there, and the windows were all like this. Old New Yorkers.
All the old stained glass.
And meanwhile, people drinking and dancing.
That's great.
I love this one, actually, because this is not just machine embroidery. This is actually two different, like if you see how this is like a cut.
I machined it, and then I cut it, and then I put another piece of fabric behind it, and then I machined back over it.
Yeah, which, you know, again, if you want it to look a certain way, you can play around. You don't have to just do it all in one go. Like, it's so much about like what you want the final feel to be. I think.
Love the crushed.
I don't know what this is.
This was the thing that I saw this in the store, and I was like, oh, okay, this is my starting point for the whole costume.
Oh, this was the handle you set the costume with.
Wow. This, whatever this is, it was some.
I don't know what it is.
It's got a real geometry to it that's different than crushed velvet.
I don't think it's for clothes.
I think it's upholstery. Yeah. But this was my handle for going back to our other conversation.
I love
that fabric.
Okay, I also have this question. These are such elaborate costumes with multiple parts and pieces. How do you store them so that they both are accessible and you know that it's all there? Do you have an inventory system?
We have we have a lot of Amazon boxes.
Sure.
With Sharpie labels on them.
Okay.
We also have a lot of the big clear bins, which is mostly what we do for fabric now.
Yeah.
But yeah, we so our house has a lot of craft storage in it.
Yeah.
There is a guest room, and it is also the craft storage room.
There was a guest room.
So that's where
there is a bed in there. There is a bed in there.
But yeah, it's a lot of, we keep them in a lot of large boxes labeled, and then everything is in there, so it's all in one spot. I feel like if they were all over the place, it would be really really hard to find.
Everything's designed to go in a suitcase when we build it.
Of course, right, because you're always traveling.
We're always traveling.
Yeah.
So it all fit in a box by and large. There's a couple pieces that don't fit in a box.
They're rare though.
Yeah, usually we're like, well, it has to go in a suitcase. So then if it has to go in a suitcase, it can go in a box.
Yeah.
So if we cast our minds back to the two of you before we built these costumes, is there something you'd love to tell your younger costumer self about the builds, how they were going to go?
These
Some
particular
advice.
builds, or just like in general?
Oh, in general.
In general?
Slow down.
Slow down is good. Slow down is good.
Slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Start earlier.
I feel like with a lot of new cosplayers, including ourselves, your eyes are bigger than your stomach.
Yeah.
And that's not just in terms of being ambitious, because I'm very happy that we were ambitious with these, because look what happened. I think in terms of wanting to speed through making the thing and then being done with it without thinking enough about, I want to make it right and clean. And it took me a really long time to learn that, honestly. And so I think valuing the finishing and trying to make the best product you can right off the bat is a lesson that doesn't get learned early on, but it would be one that would be really helpful for new folks.
And specifically, if you don't spend a lot of time thinking about how it's going to wear at the end, you do get it done, but it's uncomfortable. It doesn't ever hit the silhouette you want. You can't adjust and fix from there.
So
these are all the long tail of taking that time.
Yeah, and a lot of that, unfortunately, it does come with experience, but being open to that from the start, I think.
My other thing would be find what you really enjoy. It's okay to specialize. It's okay to have, I don't make wigs because I don't like to make wigs, so she makes all of her wigs. Yeah. I like to sit in a chair and binge Netflix and do something involving a piece of fabric this big for 6 hours at a time and make, an inch worth of finished product. Yeah. I have an update for you.
Okay.
Oh.
Do you remember the first time we met and I said, I really want to learn lace? Somebody come and teach me how to.
Yes.
Some people messaged me with some really good resources. And I learned.
You are now, oh my gosh. Look at this.
So thank you, tested audience members.
Oh, the world is great when stuff like this can happen.
Yeah, it was super cool. I got 3 DMs that were like, hey, look at this book.
What, is there some aspect to learning this that cracked open, every time you look at lace? You look at lace totally differently now, I'm sure.
Yeah, it does. It's really fascinating to look at it and think about how because what it is it's not that, it's just doing tangles of thread at
you have
points,
it right here,
at juncture points. So you have all of these little threads on all of these bobbins and you just crisscross them at certain points following a pattern.
Wow.
And this is a really old technique. This pattern is actually from the 1500s.
Wow.
So
that's thrilling.
It's super cool to be doing this in the same way that people have been doing this since before sewing machines even existed.
You're walking in the path of craftspeople from hundreds of years ago, and you're chewing on the same mud.
There's a lot of really cool, the skirt also. We've got another,
the smocking on the skirt.
This is also another really
This is a
old,
really this is smocking, which is another heirloom technique.
Oh
this
my
is,
God.
Grandmas do this on christening gowns. It's a real traditional use of it. But it's how can we use this for cosplay? This is cool. This is old and but also really new.
Yeah, I feel like people forget that these old crafting techniques are out there, and I'm really glad some of them are making kind of a comeback here.
Yeah, I love it when cosplay can learn from other things. Yeah. You don't just have to learn from cosplayers.
But it also, there's a joy in sharing the information and watching what others can do and take from it, because we've all learned so much from other makers. Mm-hmm. And that when you can take this, do something novel and interesting, and then someone DMs you, oh, there's another step that you didn't know about. Yeah. Oh, man.
Exactly. Your whip maker is yeah, we do this.
I want to speak to one that happens to me from time to time, is that people will DM me on some forum I'm on and ask me a question that's so overly broad. I can't even approach.
Oh, yeah. No. That's tough.
We get that too, and I don't know what to do with it.
How do I make my costume?
Yeah.
Which part, honey?
So I think that it's a really good piece of advice to give people, that choose a very specific question, ask about a specific technique, and you will get an answer. But a broad question is, someone asked me, how do I do animatronics? And it was
oh God.
Which part?
I feel like what I like to see is someone who says, hey, I've tried to look into this, I've done the legwork, but I still have a question. And for me, I love answering that kind of thing because it's someone who's really eager. Mm-hmm. They're trying to research on their own because that's the way you really learn. Yeah. And then, but they want more.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of person that it's really, really fun to help out.
And you also know where they're coming. Like,
and you know exactly what they
you know
want.
where they are, so then you can help them get to the next step.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the weathering. Weathering's such a key part of this costume, but not much here.
No,
Very
no,
little.
she's,
Well, you did a
she's
little
dead.
bit, too. Am I dead?
You're the necromancer.
Oh, I guess I am
always
dead.
assumed she was dead. It's
Am
the
I dead?
necromancer queen.
Yeah, so you bought this. This is when we bought an airbrush and just
This was our
airbrushed
first
the bottom.
airbrush.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
just
Sitting
really
there separating
kind
the
of.
layers and
Oh
layering.
yeah, and the
Yeah.
nice thing is then you just heat seal the edges, and the more disheveled it gets, the more appropriate it looks.
Yeah,
So.
this was a good baby's first distressing because it was kind of like, you're sitting there with the hot knife and you're like, oops. Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. It's better this way.
Yep,
you
it's
know?
fine.
So one of the things that we really like to do when we're making our cosplays is focus on adding small details into the overall design in a way that really elevates it. This is true of both canonical cosplays based on an existing property or original cosplays where we're designing it ourselves. These can be anything from doing small beadwork, embellishments with thermoplastics, foam. But one of the things that I really like to do personally is a lot of needlework techniques. This includes embroidery, smocking, gold work,
All kinds of stuff.
all kinds of
The
stuff.
thing is there's so many different kinds of techniques that you can use when you're doing embellishments or handwork. Like, there's a lot of traditional stuff, but then there's also a lot of non-traditional stuff, or you can do what we like to do and actually combine a lot of these things together to create something that's really unique and, whatever you want to make.
An example of using a technique in an unusual way to make it look much cooler is in Marceline's skirt. What I did was a technique called cut work. Usually with cut work, you're cutting holes in the fabric so that you can see through it and embroidering around the edges. However, what I chose to do was back it in this red fabric and then run it through the embroidery again, giving it a layered effect. So the silver is both over the black and over the red, creating this windowed effect that I think makes the architectural elements really pop out, makes it stand and is a super strong visual element of the costume.
I mean, that was nice because you designed it to look kind of like a Gothic cathedral, right? That was her whole shtick.
I actually based it on a real window that I found and then altered a bit. So
yeah, and if you kind of like hold it sideways, you can barely see the extra dimension with how the red is a little recessed in there. But like even back a bit farther away, I think it looks really cool because you just have that extra dimension involved here.
another great traditional technique, this is like something that grandmas do for christening gowns and other.
That's rude. That's rude to me personally. Call me a grandma.
It's called smocking. And this is a technique where you just use a very simple stitching on a grid pattern and it creates this very three-dimensional pattern. You can do this as a basket weave. You can make it look like squares. You can make it look like diamonds. And it just really gives it a lot of visual interest. It's not just a panel of color, but it's a panel of texture. It's something different. It draws the eye.
So one thing that may not be obvious is this is one piece of fabric. This is not a lot of little things put together. This is a single piece that has been kind of pulled together. And you know, if you look at the back, it's not very pretty, but you can kind of see how this stitching puffed the fabric out. And that's how we get this kind of really crazy dimension on the front.
And it's really not that hard. Most needlework techniques, once you sort of figure out what they're doing, they're really not that difficult. Smocking in particular is, it's really simple. It takes a long time, but it's really simple. You would start with a piece of fabric marked out with a grid like this. This is marked in chalk on inch wide. And you can see I've drawn diagonals where my stitching would be. All you really have to do then is not tangle your thread. But you start with a stitch, you follow the diagonal line that's marked in the chalk, you pick it up, and then you pull it tight. And it creates that puff. And this puff doesn't really look very interesting right now, most needlework techniques, it's not like spray paint where you're gonna get 3 seconds of work in and it's a high impact. But if you keep going, you do another stitch, you pull that one tight too, it starts to create, more of a pattern. So you do it over and over and over again. Yep. You do each stitch and it creates...
After you do it, 300, 500, 1,000 times, you've created a lot of these really interesting textural pieces.
This is a Trapunto, which is a type of quilting. You would start with your lines all stitched out. This was stitched on an embroidery machine, but you could do it by hand. And I stitched all my patterns. There's 2 layers of fabric here. There's a stretch fabric, and then there's a heavy backing fabric. And then what I did was I went in behind it, and I put a little bit of stuffing, just regular polyfill, polyester quilting. Well, this isn't even for quilting. This is for like stuffed animals.
Yeah, well, I think this is for
stuffed animals.
Well, who cares? We're using it for this.
Yeah, we're using it for this. And that creates this really 3-dimensional shape. You can emphasize the shape by adding even more thread on top of it to really make the elements puff. And then you cover it with embroidery floss, just back and forth, and it creates this very 3-dimensional, very shiny, interesting. Now, could you paint this? Absolutely. Could you make it out of foam? Sure. You could even embroider it flat, but I think the combination of the traditional techniques, the trapunto, the embroidery, the gold work, really adds a lot of dimension and a lot of interest to what is a relatively small piece.
So this is 3 different things, right?
Yes, this is 3 things. So there's the stuffing, there's the embroidery, and then there's what's called gold work, which is where you use these very small tubes of stretchy metal. They're usually metallic gold work, but you can get them in other colors, and you add them as emphasis or dimensional, just decoration along the stitching lines, and it creates. So even a piece this small, you can combine traditional techniques, you can combine needlework techniques to create something that's really original and creative. When you're doing needlework, another thing to think about is materials. What kind of materials do you want to do for your embellishments? One of the materials that that I love is lace.
Yep.
Lace.
Got lace on everything.
Lace. I love lace. I think it's beautiful. I think it's a great material for all kinds of costumes. And so I really wanted to learn how to make lace. And the way that you make lace, going back hundreds of years.
It takes a long time.
It's a very traditional art, is bobbin lace.
You don't see this a ton with cosplay, but I feel like it's coming back.
I think more cosplayers are going to get into it. I think cosplayers are interested in these old techniques. I'm interested, at least. Yeah. Bobbin lace is, as you might have guessed, making lace using bobbins. And the way that you do that is you have several pairs of bobbins. For this pattern, I have a lot of pairs of bobbins. But it's really simple, just like all the other needlework techniques. The steps to do it are very simple, but then it takes a lot of patience and finesse. And it's very simple. You just cross bobbins, pull it tight.
And then the tension makes the lace, right?
You stick a pin in it. And then as you keep braiding it down and crossing them over with each other, it essentially knots it down the line of the lace until you have a strip. And your lace, you can make it look however you want because you can get lots of patterns, but for this lace, you have something a little bit like that. And it needs to be pressed. How long did this take you? This took me 6 Dungeons and Dragons sessions to do, because that's when I do it.
At 3 hours each, this is 18 hours of work.
This is 18 hours of lace.
You have how much more of this to do for Marcy?
I don't want to talk about it.
Okay.
Kelley, Regan, you guys are so amazing and so inspiring. I am having a fanboy moment, having not just you, but you and your incredible wares here in the cave. I can't thank you.
I'm
Thank
so
you
excited.
so much for inviting us.
This is awesome.
If you guys have questions, put them in the comments. Links to their books and their videos are in the description below. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next time. I am such a big fan of Regan and Kelley's work. I want to thank them again for bringing their amazing creations and creativity here to the cave for me to see up close. If you would like to see it even closer, we also filmed this in virtual reality as part of our Tested VR series. You can watch it right now either on the Tested VR app or on MetaQuest TV. Links and details are in the description. Thank you guys for watching.